Welcome to week 7. This week we're jumping into fallacies. I'm hoping that this will be something that you guys can recognize a little easier. When I say recognize easier, I mean just the concepts. When we actually get into the arguments, we can kind of confuse them at times. We have to really break them down and think through them. And I think this will be beneficial because fallacies are abundant. I commit fallacies often when I'm arguing with someone, and you probably do as well, and they do back to us. That's almost certain. So let's take a look here. Chapter 7. So we move along here. Some ways arguments can fail, and we're looking at fallacies. So the definition of a fallacy, it is a pattern of a failed relation among concepts or beliefs and affects the reasoning that exemplifies that pattern. So some things to think through why fallacies are important. It's recognizing when someone else's argument commits a fallacy, so we are not fooled by that. If you watch politicians, and I'll post some videos too of politicians committing some egregious fallacies, and knowing how to keep our own arguments from committing fallacies because we want to provide sound and valid arguments. So let's take a look here of how it kind of breaks down. So fallacy as it's applied to argument, it's a broad word and it can point to a variety of problems, and if you just Google fallacy, there are hundreds of fallacies. Well, we're going to focus on kind of the main ones is what we're looking at here. Chapters 12, 13, and 14, which we probably won't get into, look at formal fallacies. What we deal more with, where are we here? There you go, are informal fallacies. That's kind of what we will have our issues with in the majority of our life will be the informal fallacies, which is why we're focusing on those. Any argument that commits a fallacy fails to provide rational support for its conclusion. That's what we're looking at here. Let's skip over this one here. All right, so here's where we fall with informal fallacies. So chapter 7 is on fallacies of failed induction, and then so on. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And I don't want this video to be too long, so we'll go through this stuff quickly. These are the 5 we're going to look at in this week, and other ones we'll get to at another time. So fallacies of failed induction, hasty generalization, weak analogy, false cause, appeal to ignorance, and appeal to unqualified authority. I will try to go through these quickly, but maybe read up on them as well and maybe watch some videos on it. So first is hasty generalization, which I think we might have a fairly good mindset of what this actually means. We're trying to ultimately break something down in saying that all things are alike based on either a small sample size or something that's not comprehensive or randomly selected. So basically we're making a generalization that is hasty. So we're generalizing information based off not enough evidence is what it breaks down to. Example, suppose someone from the Midwest visits California for the first time, becomes acquainted with 3 native Californians. They all happen to practice yoga. Imagine that on his return home, he tells his friends all Californians practice yoga, because his experience was 3 out of the 39 million people practice yoga, therefore they all do. So that's a breakdown here. So I met this person who practices yoga, this person who practices yoga, this person who practices yoga, therefore all Californians practice yoga. It is a hasty generalization. It stereotypes Californians and assumes that they are all the same, and the conclusion is just simply unwarranted. Ron, as we know, was from San Diego. He does not practice yoga. He does do some light yogging, though. Okay, so to avoid stereotyping, together with the fallacy of hasty generalization, that always underlies it, keep in mind these things. No conclusion about a class could gather support from the sample that is too small, insufficiently comprehensive, or not randomly selected. So those kind of our criteria for making a generalization and wanting to avoid a hasty generalization. So in order to avoid hasty generalization, we want to again make sure that the samples are large enough, they're comprehensive, and are randomly selected among a targeted group. All right, next is a weak analogy. Weak analogy is a fallacy, and some things are alike, though they're not alike in those relevant ways in the conclusion that we're making. So any failure to make a reasonable claim that these things are alike in the premises are in fact analogous in ways relevant to its conclusion. Sorry, I'm trying to go through these quick here because I don't want this to be a 30-minute video. So F and J are alike in the fact that they have A, B, and C. F also has D, therefore J has feature D. All right, that's where we're looking at trying to break down this reasoning in a good analogy, but however, we fall short in this. So let's take a look here. There are 2 siblings, a boy 5 years old, sister who's 13. One evening, Johnny's bedtime. She says, "Johnny, it's 9 o'clock, time for bed." Johnny says that Susie stays up late. So here's what he is trying to say. Susie and I are alike in a number of ways. We are siblings in this household. We do chores. We do all this stuff. Susie is not supposed to go to bed at 9. Therefore, I'm not supposed to go to bed at 9. So trying to make this argument, but it is a weak analogy in the fact that they are similar in some ways, but she's also significantly older and probably has a later bedtime. So trying to make this argument is a weak analogy because what really is important and what really matters here doesn't actually fit. So to avoid the weak analogy, we ask ourselves this. How large is the number of features of the things claimed to be analogous share? So how alike are Susie and Johnny ultimately? And how are these features relevant to the analogy's conclusion? Are they actually, the fact that we're siblings and the fact that we both do chores around the house, are they really relevant to the analogy's conclusion? In Johnny's argument, absolutely not. Are all things alleged in the premise to be actually similar, as in they all have the same features? Here we're same features numbers. So we're trying to see, are they actually similar? When we're breaking down the number of features, are they actually similar or are they not fitting? So that's how we avoid a weak analogy. A good example on the video, I'm not going to show it, click on that in the PowerPoint that's online. Gives us an analogy of Mercedes and ice cream. False cause. So false causes the mistake saying that there's a causal connection between two things when in fact there is none or minimal or it's non-existent. There are really three ways fallacy of false cause occur. There's post hoc ergo propter hoc, non causa pro causa, and oversimplified cause. So we get our Latin lesson for the day here. But basically the post hoc ergo propter hoc means after this, therefore because of this. So after this happened, therefore it happened because of this, is what we're saying. So it's a fallacy concluding that some event earlier is the cause of a later event when they're not actually related. And it is something that we commit this fallacy when we see two events could be conjoined, when it eventually seem natural to assume that the earlier is the cause of the later. But a lot of times they're pretty absurd, and we're going to give some absurd situations here. So Barbara was born in a month that falls under the sign of Capricorn. Barbara is a thoughtful person. Therefore, being born under the sign of Capricorn causes her to be a thoughtful person. So this is an argument that's being made here, but does it really support its conclusion? No, because there's just a causal connection. One happening first, being born in a month, and the other developing as a thoughtful person, really don't tie together, and there's no good evidence for that claim. So we want to make sure, again, that it's a rationally acceptable argument as we move forward with it. Okay, next one. In false cause, non causa pro causa, Latin for what is not the cause is mistaken for the cause. This occurs when basically we're looking at a sequence of events that happen contemporaneously, that is in the same period of time, when you assume something is its cause when it's actually not. An example for me, if I'm watching Nebraska football and I'm standing up and Nebraska scores a touchdown and I say, oh, they scored a touchdown because I was standing. Which don't assume that doesn't happen, because I, as a superstitious sports fan, that can fall into place at times. But it's really not the cause of why Nebraska scored a touchdown. Me standing has nothing to do with that. As much as I'd like to think I helped the team, I don't, being thousands of miles away. But that's an absurd argument that us sports fans can make at times, right? But basically, what is the cause is mistaken for the cause. So for an example here, basically one form is how this happens when cause and effect get confused. So an example, in an early 19th century study of British agriculture, it's noted that as farmers surveyed, all the hardworking industrious ones owned at least one cow, while lazy ones did not. This led researchers to conclude that productivity could be improved just by giving farmers a cow. Well, we know that's ridiculous. So we're assuming that because they're hardworking, because they have a cow, and realistically they have a cow probably because they're hardworking. Now, plainly, there's something wrong with this reasoning, and it seems to rest on this extended argument right here. All those observed are cow owners. None of the observed lazy farmers are cow owners. Therefore, all and only cow owning farmers are industrious. There's a positive correlation between cow owning and industrious. Therefore, cow owning causes farmers to be industrious. And we know that's just ridiculous as we check this guy out here. So right here, breaking it down right here, assuming that there's enough surveyed and comprehensive, steps 1, 2, and 3 here, don't make a mistake, but adding that assumption at the end there in that conclusion saying that it's cowing that causes industriousness is ridiculous. All right, oversimplified cause. Basically saying that there's an overstating a cause between two events that really don't have a link, but when we look at it, we say, oh, that kind of seems like it could have a link. So here's our president, not our president, but any president giving a re-election speech here, saying at the beginning of this administration, the economy was sluggish. At the end, the economy was booming. The White House economic policies do have an effect on the nation's economy. Therefore, the improvement is due to the administration's policies. There's a lot more that goes into effect a nation's economy. And it's very much an oversimplified cause saying, because I did this, this is what happened. And politicians will do this over and over and over again, as long as the things they're pointing to are good. They'll never say, oh, because of my one thing I did, this is bad. No, that's always someone else's problem, right? But politicians do this a lot as far as the oversimplified cause. It fails to support its conclusion. All right, here you can read over this. There we go. All right, so summary of the simplified cause, the false cause there, oversimplified cause, non-causa, pro causa, post hoc, ergo propter hoc are our three types of false cause. We have an appeal to ignorance. Basically, appeal to ignorance is committed by any argument which its conclusion is or isn't the case is supposedly supported by lack of evidence to the contrary. So taking a looky here, an argument whose premises merely invoke the lack of evidence is an appeal to ignorance. We want to make sure that there's good evidence. So someone could say, no one has ever been able to prove that ESP doesn't exist, therefore it's reasonable to believe in it. That doesn't work right. That doesn't work well there. You are looking at this as an appeal to ignorance rather than looking at the actual facts. So that's an appeal to ignorance. There's two types of it. No one has shown that P is false, therefore P is true. No one has shown that P is true, therefore P is false. And finally, as I'm breezing through this here, appeal to an unqualified authority. You see this in advertising all the time. They'll say, hey, this spokesperson says buy this, when realistically that spokesperson has nothing to do with that product. You'll see athletes promoting a variety of different things when realistically, what does an athlete know about homeowners insurance, right? So unqualified authority. So the best example of this would be our friend Tom Cruise back in the day when he went a little off the rails on Oprah, jumping on the couch, doing all that stuff, and talking about psychiatry being a pseudoscience to Matt Lauer. And Tom Cruise is not a qualified authority on psychiatry. Example here, and this is where we see the arguments for unqualified authority within athletes, right? So many years ago, a commercial in New York City had Joe DiMaggio, Yankees baseball star, touting the Bowery State Bank. The person might say, that's the best bank because Joe DiMaggio says so. Joe DiMaggio, though a great baseball player with a 56-game hitting streak, was never really an authority on banks. But we see that a lot within advertising. One thing to remember, not all appeals to authority are fallacious. The ADA recommends flossing, therefore flossing is a good way to prevent tooth decay, because the American Dental Association is a qualified authority. So, what's the difference? It hinges on whether the authority cited to support the claim is indeed an expert in the field and expressing a view well represented, perhaps a prevailing one among experts among the topics. And to avoid it, keep in mind the difference between those appeals to authority that are fallacious and those aren't. The things that really base on are, does it involve sufficient expertise? Is expressing a view well represented in the field or the conditions are met? There is no fallacy. Okay, that was a lot, and I kind of just squeezed it all in because YouTube limits my videos to 15 minutes, and so I have about 30 seconds left here. So, guys, hope this makes sense. I'm going to post some other videos. If you watch the PowerPoint, I'm going to post as well. There's some examples of television commercials, a couple speakers talking that break down these fallacies as well. And we're going to spend some more time going through these things for the next few weeks, and it's going to carry on into after spring break as well. Because I think fallacies are something we really need to recognize. But it starts with taking the argument, breaking it down, seeing if it's valid, invalid, sound, if it's strong or reliable, and then going from there. My time is up. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.